It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all in Brussels. I'm sure you would expect me to welcome you at ULB, but I'll have to be accurate, and this building actually doesn't belong to ULB, nor does it belong to VUB, our sister Dutch language university. The two signs you see at front of the doors are not signs of ownership, but signs of a shared experiment. The building where we are is the first phase of a 4-year project which will unfold to the rest of this site, which used to be the police academy up until about 20 years ago. Then the site was abandoned, was given to the region of Brussels, and then a project started to be put together as to how to transform this former military installation into something innovative, something that would fill a gap and something which would meet the needs of the community. Given its location, just about halfway between ULB and VUB, it was quite obvious that the universities had to do something about this site and had an opportunity to develop something together. So the logic underlying this whole renovation operation is to create a new neighborhood of mixed activities which would be quite innovative in many ways. It will involve housing. Brussels knows housing crisis like most European capitals. A lot of student housing, but also regular housing. There'll be families living here. There'll be a lot of buildings being used for university or education or research activities. So this building was the first to be renovated. The way it was renovated was also to be a model, not just a model renovation, but an experimental renovation. So a lot went into making this renovation, not just up to the highest standard of environmental friendliness and sustainability, but pushing the boundaries of making this renovation its own experiment. Let me give you a few examples. The whole site will be heated by geothermal energy. This site, U Square, has become the largest geothermal site in Brussels. Most of us didn't even know there was geothermal energy in Brussels. But sure enough, the whole, not just this building, but the whole site will be using geothermal energy, not just to warm ourselves up in the winter, but also to cool ourselves down in the summer, making this building the only building on all ULB, VUB campuses which is being cooled down in the summer, which is quite a privilege for us whose offices are here. I told you it's not VUB, it's not ULB, it's the region. The strategy for the whole site, but this is the first one to be finalized, is that everything here is jointly organized or jointly run by ULB and VUB at some point. Every single research team or activity in this building is always some form of joint activity between ULB and VUB. This is why we have 3 mics. The Brussels Institute for Advanced Studies, which occupies the other end of the building with its 19 apartments and its conference rooms and all kind of facilities for the Advanced Studies Institute, is also jointly run by ULB and VUB. Open labs are not just benefiting to CIVIS, but also ULB, VUB cooperation there too. Across to your right are 2 buildings which are filled with fab labs from ULB, VUB also collaborating. So the site is still sort of under construction and will be for the years to come, but you will have an opportunity, given the weather, to walk about, and if you walk towards that direction, you'll find this kind of a town square of U Square, which is a big open space, which is not just there to provide some openness and some shade because they planted some trees, but there'll be all kinds of activities, just like you would expect in the town square. And at the other end of that town square, you'll find this quite impressive building which used to be where the police would train their horses or would train their staff riding horses. So that building was renovated and will in the future become a food court and an organic fresh market. So I'm not going to give you too many details, but just be aware that you are in a building which shows what we want to achieve on this site, which is quite innovative in many ways. Let me give you just a few other examples of how innovative this renovation was. You see to your right some apparent bricks and a lot of concrete. The principle used for renovating this building was we only tear down what needs to be torn down. We only put new material if we need new material. So the idea with that wall is that we don't need it. We could take it down. But at the same time, it's not a problem to keep that wall. So by not demolishing that wall, we save on all the material we would have to go to waste and also the energy needed to demolish that wall. So we keep that wall. The wall cover that you see upstairs, that you will see in many rooms here, is not regular plaster. It's actually a clay-based covering, which is not just very environmental friendly, but the clay in that cover was taken out of earth dug in construction sites elsewhere in Brussels. So it's recycling waste and transforming it into an environmental friendly wall cover. I mean, these kind of examples are, I could go on forever to give you small details in this building, which led to what you have here. Just one last one. Under your feet, there was a need for a thick layer of isolation. And this phase of the construction took place during COVID. So you remember the supply chains were really disturbed at the time, and there was no material available. And so they went to engineers and students were involved too, and they found that they could use, again experimentally, the waste of seashells, mussel shells, which were widely available in the Netherlands in particular. And so they decided to crush those mussel shells, bring them here, and use them as a replacement material for this isolation. So under your feet are 2 meters of mussel shells. And so far, it has been working wonders. And again, we've recycled waste as an experiment to replace material construction. Enough about this building, but so that you know where you are, I'm here to welcome you. And it's kind of fun. I knew it would be like that, but it's kind of funny because looking at you in this room is like looking at a Zoom meeting that we have so much of, as if we had upgraded the license to 3D. Except for one detail. I mean, so many faces are familiar, but the advantage of Zoom is that you have your name underneath you. So we should have asked you to wear a name tag so that I can address you by name, but I can't. And it's here that we see how used we have become to those name tags, because I look at so many faces, and probably half of you I couldn't actually name, which is a shame, but we'll work on that as we go along. This also shows us how important it is to meet in person every now and then. You can't do everything on Zoom. And this is why so many of you made it to Brussels, and we're so happy about it. There's over 70 people here. And just for our guest here, this crowd is actually the living blood of CIVIS. This is the support, the members of the support units that are basically running the show. So we have 5 support units at this point. One is education unit, another one is research unit, another one is mobility unit. We have the digital campus unit and the communications unit. Each of those units is populated by at least one member from each university. Some of them working part-time for the Alliance, and some of them working full-time for the Alliance. So that's quite impressive to see all of you in the same room. Without further ado, I will shift into this introductory panel, which was designed to start up this UNITS summit by zooming out and sort of looking at things from a broader perspective. Each and every one of you is a hyper-specialized worker, knowing like very few know these bits that you work on in education, in research, in funding, in digital campus, in communication, whatever. But some of you might lose sight of the bigger picture. So we are going to try, and this is very officer of the higher education of many of the familiar faces we used to have moved on, and Yann-Mael is one of those faces that is still here. So it's almost reassuring to have him with us, but he's also best placed to look at the broader picture. Mattia Bellotti to your left, that's a familiar face for those who work in this building. I forgot to tell you, among the ULB VUB activities, the CIVIS office for ULB is in this building just behind you, but also the EUTOPIA office for VUB and beyond is in this same building, one floor above CIVIS. So having two alliances in the same building is something which is quite remarkable too. And EUTOPIA is the alliance where VUB, our sister university in Dutch language, belongs. So that also creates an interesting connection. Ieva Grumbinaitė is also someone you might be familiar with, although you might not see her that often, but you are familiar at least with the work she has coordinated in the form of a very interesting report called The Study on the Outcomes and Transformational Potential of the European Universities Initiative, which was published last year and which looked at the activity activities and the impact of research services to European Commission. Now that she's done with that thick report that I was telling you about, she is very involved in the rollout of the European degree label, which we will, I'm sure, also discuss today. And Sophia Karner, to my left, is the Secretary-General of Una Europa, another one of those first-generation alliances, one of the largest one, like CIVIS, coordinated by KU Leuven here in Belgium, but with their coordination offices here in Brussels. I should have mentioned that Ieva is also teaching at the University of Vilnius, and the University of Vilnius being member of Arcus Alliance, also a well-known alliance by those of us in contact with other alliances. So let's start this conversation. I told you I will structure this discussion in three stages. The first one being, I think, the shortest, but just also to rewind. Some of you were originally, what the intention was, what the dream was when the European Union decided to start an experiment, basically, and invest into encouraging universities to cluster into consortia to collaborate in the long term. How would you summarize what the dream looked like initially?
I'll try to summarize this. Indeed, I must say, I may be a familiar faces. Other of my colleagues may have moved on, but I wasn't there at the beginning. So I don't consider myself as a dinosaur yet of the sector, but I'm not intending to move on anytime soon. See if that provides any reassurance to anyone. No, I think that, well, the alliances came at a time, yes, you said 2018, 2017. It all started from, I think, a political momentum that was built and led, and we have to recognize it, by France. The election of the President Macron, who had a very pro-European agenda when he was elected for the first time, and made a speech in the Sorbonne University in which he basically made a priority of almost relaunching something like a Bologna process, something like Erasmus, building on the top of these two very well-established things and looking at how we can go further. The idea behind, which wasn't full 100% clear and planned 10 years ahead when it was launched, indeed it was about experimenting, but I think the core idea was to pass a message to say it's more important today than ever to be Europeans. There's plenty of opportunities. Higher education institutions, universities can build and offer their students when they work together. We need to look a bit beyond just being fine with ECTS credits, recognition, with Erasmus student exchange, which are all very, very good, and we need absolutely to continue doing that. But how can we use this internationalization of education, which is happening everywhere in the world, and in particular in Europe, to make it our competitive advantage in Europe? Because there's no place in the world, apart from Europe, where cooperating is almost now a tradition, and where we cooperate so intensively one with another beyond borders. That places us really apart in the world. How can we use internationalization strategically? So not just to have nice exchange here and there, but how can we use it as a true strategy to build our own capacities as an institution in a local context, in a regional context, in a national context, and then build ourselves an international profile together with others. So I think the basic idea with this, and it worked nicely. I think now today nobody's questioning even the fact that alliances exist. Nobody's questioning the fact that they should continue. They started at the time. We also have to remember that there was quite some opposition from certain countries, certain institutions as well, certain organizations to the idea of alliances, saying, we don't need that, or what's the benefit for me, what's the added value of it, etc. But with what you're doing every day and what the other alliances are doing every day, bit by bit, I think you won the battle of showing, well, it makes sense. It makes sense, it's good for us as an institution, it's good for us as a consortium, in the end it's good for you as a country, it's good for us as Europe, it's good for our students in general. So congrats on what you've done.
I think that's quite a nice summary, actually, Yann-Mael, thank you. The one thing I would insist on also, which maybe wasn't mentioned by Yann-Mael, is that initially the way the initiative was presented was to integrate universities together, although this was very vague, but across all their missions. I mean, we might get the feeling today that it was more about the education side of university, but it isn't. In the dream, it was universities getting closer together to be more efficient, to be more attractive and everything else. We'll talk about that later, but just remember that initially the vision is one of universities in all their diversity and all their missions. I want to move on immediately to how far we've come and ask Ieva, probably even more of a challenge, because your report was so good at detailing where we are at, or where we were at the end of 2023, to just summarize with us how much of that dream have we achieved, and how have these alliances transformed higher education, because that was also the explicit goal, one of transformation of higher education landscape in Europe.
That's a broader one. I'm trying to think of the aspects to touch upon. Indeed, the report is really thick and really dense, and we covered actually. I think one of the main challenges was because we were supposed to finish a bit sooner, but in the end the project extended to 4 years until it finally got published. And we kept changing the number of universities in the initiative. I think until the last publication, nobody was really sure how many there are, because you would have one information from IKEA, some information from the Alliance websites. In the end, I think we started with 380 something, and we ended with way over 600. So you can see how the initiative has evolved. Both qualitatively and quantitatively, and I think one of the deliverables we did for the report that might make sense looking into if you want to get out of your alliance silo and look at the broader perspective was the monitoring framework we developed for the alliances. I mean, alliances are monitored by IKEA, but we tried to have an approach that's more aligned with the policy goals of the initiative, so integrating education, research and innovation, and I think there are 7 categories aligned with the policy goals. It wasn't met with a lot of enthusiasm by the alliances because it meant another both qualitative and quantitative Excel sheet to fill out and to collect the information on all the joint activities that have been developed. That was a little bit similar to what is requested normally. So obviously it was a bit of an additional burden, but then we put the information together, and even the alliances were like alliance representatives, when they saw it, were really positively surprised, because with their 1 or 2 joint programs or 10 blended intensive programs or a micro-credentials course, you don't see the bigger picture. And I feel that that monitoring framework, which you can also find on the Commission website if you look at the alliances, really puts things together, where you see that now we have, we did it in 2013, it would deserve a rerun, and it would, the figures would be higher for sure, but that the alliances together have developed, say, over 150 joint programs at master's, bachelor's, any levels, that mobility figures were also aligned, saying that overall so many students have benefited from mobility, or so many students have taken part in a number of blended intensive programs. So I feel, I feel the initiative really has gone far, because when we started, it was the first alliances selected in 2019 were just picking up and not quite sure where they're going, setting up their activities. And well, now we have all this vibrant community, also with the 4EU for All community, where it seems that not only from an individual alliance perspective things are happening, but also between the alliances jointly, and that learning from each other and good practices aspect has really got going as well.
Thank you. I think what we tend to forget when you say we have to get out of the silo of our own alliance is that although there's 65 funded alliances today, if you look at them closely, it's not as if it was a replication of the same model of an alliance. Every one of those alliances, each and every one of them, is its own experiment. Some of them are similar, of course, but some of them are quite intriguing and fascinating. I mean, look up, for example, Film EU. That's almost the opposite of what EUTOPIA, Una Europa, or CIVIS are. We are comprehensive alliances, research intensive. So we do everything at the highest level, whereas Film EU is very focused on one specific theme, which is cinema studies, but also the training of the staff of the cinema industry. Super focused, with structures including universities, but also art schools, for example. So it's a completely different approach to it. Some alliances are based on, for example, CEU is also one I really like. It's an alliance of universities which are located in cities by the sea, and specifically with big harbor activity. And so they develop activities and joint programs which are very specific to that, which is also a completely different approach still. And then there are the big alliances like the ones represented here, which are supposed to try to see what alliances can achieve overall in the broadest range of their activities, which is both opening up the game, but it's actually a bit dazzling for us because we have to make choices, right? We can't just do everything. So I'd like to ask Sophia, in the experience of Una Europa, which again compares quite nicely to CIVIS in terms of scale and scope, how much you feel that Una Europa has achieved in terms of transforming or contributing to a transformation of the European higher education landscape?
Very small question to start with. Yeah, thank you, François. I think, yeah, if we think about the transformation of the initiative or the potential, let's say, we have to look at it at different levels. So we have to look at it at the institutional level, but then also that really encourages the transformation of the landscape more generally. But I think it's also happening in various ways. Some ways are far more explicit and far easier to monitor, to showcase, whereas institutional transformation in itself is something that's very difficult to capture and to also, yeah, referring to what Ieva was saying, to capture in something like a monitoring framework. So I think that's also a bit the complexity of what we're looking at. But yeah, I mean, some of the things that you probably know about us as an alliance that we think has been quite transformational for the European higher education area as a whole is the work that we've done at the level of joint bachelors, where we've really tried to do things that weren't possible before, that are very different, that are really pushing the boundaries. So our joint bachelor European studies, joint bachelor sustainability, that we have really experimented and tested and have come up to lots and lots of difficulties, obstacles at the institutional level, at the regulatory level, at the national level, but where things have also moved quite a lot. So I think that's one of the most tangible examples I can give you where we have really seen the transformation already taking place, which I think we also have to remind ourselves that it has, I mean, for us, we've existed now just over 7 years. For other alliances, this will be less. So if we talk about transforming something like higher education in Europe, we're still very much at the beginning of it all. But I do think that if you ask, also to the point that you made, François, if you look at each alliance individually and you ask them to foreground one unique thing that they've progressed, then if you take it as a whole, you can already capture massive amounts of innovation and transformation in that.
I would also mention, I'm sure you might have examples yourself, I think it's very significant of the impact we have at the level of the education landscape is how we've uncovered obstacles in integration or in international collaboration or joint programs, which led us to actually ask our respective authorities to make, I mean, in some cases, change the law. And my interpretation or my impression is that the weight of the alliance and being part of such a big endeavor really helped us leverage our request to the government. There's at least 2 known cases within CIVIS of law changes taking place in Greece and Spain, at least these 2 I know of, early in the history of the alliance, which were obtained by just telling them this needs to change because it's impeding our capacity to join this initiative and to be part of this renovation and change of higher education. And sure enough, the laws were changed. I don't think it would have been that easy or it would have delivered at all if it wasn't part of the alliance. So there is already some, specific examples of that. What about, EUTOPIA? You are also a comprehensive, rather large-scale alliance. How much would you say you have contributed, or can you give us specific examples whereby you think that the alliance has already made a difference in modernizing or making the higher education landscape of Europe more competitive, more attractive, or whatever the aims are?
Good morning, and yes, indeed, we are like CIVIS, like Una Europa and several other alliances of the first wave. We're an alliance of comprehensive universities, in our case, from 10 different countries. And I must say, if I'm looking also what we have tried to do in EUTOPIA since the beginning, although I have to say I'm here only from 2023, so from, let's say, the moving and the shift from what we call the pilot phase, or the first 3-year projects, to now the phase that is ending this year with the 4-year project, in our case, called EUTOPIA More. So in EUTOPIA, and I think this is also the goal, and I believe also personally is really the goal of alliances. An alliance can be really successful only if we manage to really bring the daily activities of the alliance into the daily life of the staff, of course, the students and the academics that are working at universities. We all know that the funding for these activities is very limited compared to the overall and, let's say, broader goal that we want to have for us being a comprehensive alliance of comprehensive universities, really focusing on education, research, and innovation. So, of course, the activities and goal are really broad, and the funding is limited. The only way really to make a change and really to make the alliance sustainable, but also successful in the long term, is really being able to, let's say, have a combination of whatever a certain person was doing in the university in terms of study, in terms of work, and what new, what additional, what complementary can be done by the same person within the alliance. And this was a bit the principle also in how several activities of EUTOPIA have started. For example, in education, we have our model, which is a bottom-up collaborative model based on what we call connected communities, was really meant to connect academics and also staff working on specific teams, across specific teams, in small groups across our universities. And we managed to develop more than 60 communities so far, involving more than 400 academics across our universities, for example. And the way they collaborate is very different, because indeed we really left the co-creation approach to be bottom-up and to be decided by the colleagues that are involved in these small communities. But I believe this was a really good way to let's say, transform the way people are working, the way people are, and the way colleagues are, let's say, developing joint activities, joint courses, and their, let's say, curricular activities in a way that is really co-creational, and really in a way that, finding a way to introduce, if we can say, a European element, an international collaboration element within existing programs. And in this way, I believe we've been really transformative, really being able to involve in 7 years such a high number of people, and overall more than 10,000 students have been involved in some way in some of these educational activities. Now we are, let's say, I believe, at the next stage of the transformation, so really being able to make these activities sustainable and truly embedded in the curricula. Another achievement that we just achieved, and we are now, it's not yet fully visible, but we are now making everything visible, is about what we call a EUTOPIA label. So it's a label on the courses that are connected to these connected communities, and are courses that are truly co-created internationally. So although you are in one single university as a student, you can attend either online or with some hybrid mobilities, depending on the cases. You can attend a course where you have students and academics or staff involved in teaching from other universities than your own and from other countries. So this definitely was a big achievement for our alliance, and also a transformation, as we also really had to deal internally with all the university process on how to make this label existing, which is something that was never existing before in our university, for example. And maybe if I have to pick just another example now, maybe more focusing on the research side, I believe what we try to do is really, our mission was originally very ambitious, let's say, to really have a joint, let's say, research and innovation office with all our universities, which we also found a name for that, which is called GLEN office, which was standing for Grant, Legal and Innovation, but also because there was a popular name in Sweden, and it was started from an idea from our Swedish colleagues. We didn't really get there yet on really having a joint and full structures, as you might imagine. This is still complicated, but on the other side, I really think it was a good way to connect our research offices, to create a new way of working where really our offices are much more working in synergies. And for example, when there are new project opportunities, we are seeing the results now after, let's say, 5 years of starting these initiatives, but now finally we are seeing the first results. We really see that EUTOPIA and, let's say, collaborations in projects, in research and innovation projects with EUTOPIA partners is now really becoming, maybe I would not say a priority, but still facilitated. So if, let's say, there is a new opportunities for EUTOPIA, this is taken much more into account and maybe goes faster to the people that potentially can join the project than it used to be before. So really, I have to say, this is really a way of daily transforming. It's not a transformation on, let's say, the overall higher education system, but I believe, and especially looking at your audience, I really believe that this is the type of transformation that we need to bring to staff and to academics involved in our university to really have EUTOPIA or in general alliances as part of the daily jobs that you are all doing.
Thank you. I mentioned how each of the 65 alliances is its own experiment. In a way, sometimes it's worrying that we might each be reinventing the wheel in our own corners, and would be a waste of capacity that we all face the same challenge. But in most cases, actually, it's interesting that each of us gives it a go, because then when we talk and we exchange experience within the community of practice, which was mentioned, or anywhere else, we might have different ideas, different contexts leading to different initiatives. But the one you mentioned is probably one of the hardest, when again, based on discussions with colleagues, is how do we enable our academics to get together? How do we facilitate their international collaboration beyond the usual forms of collaboration, which is usually ad hoc for a specific project? How do we make that structural? CIVIS started with its 5 interdisciplinary challenge-based hubs, but other networks have started to bloom spontaneously, more informally, giving us ideas as how to help them. But it's kind of difficult because we have limited resources, as you mentioned. So how about Una Europa? What was what were the initiatives which you thought were most successful in trying to enable or to help academics get together in communities?
Thank you. You're very right, François, that especially bringing academics on board with alliances remains a work in progress, I would say. It's partly due to the fact that, as we've all referred to already, financial resources are sometimes constrained, but also the time of academics is always very limited, and we do have to really showcase what we offer above and beyond what they're already doing. So we took, I think, quite a similar approach to what you've just said of CIVIS, where we also have 6 focus areas that are very interdisciplinary, that we're now developing into hubs, looking at education, looking at research and innovation, and also societal outreach. So these are really, primarily for exchange and for really finding ways of working together. For now, you'll see a very natural leaning towards a lot of educational joint initiatives, simply due to the fact that this is where most of the funding has come from, primarily so far. So when it comes to the Erasmus Plus funding, it has initiated a lot of collaborations on, like we already said, joint programs, but also at the level of micro-credentials, summer winter schools. We also do a lot of work on early career level. This is something I haven't mentioned yet. So we have a joint PhD program in cultural heritage. And the unique thing there is that beyond the program, which has been jointly developed, it actually gives the early career researchers access to what we call transnational research teams. So they already have access to established researchers, not just at their own institutions, but across all our partners, which is, I mean, personally, I see really one of the most added values for any target group is for early career researchers who are looking for a network, who are looking for opportunities. And if you think you could give them almost a one-stop shop into 11 universities in 11 countries, their infrastructure, their resourcing, their teachers, their researchers, I think it's really quite an amazing thing. Having said that, I think if we asked our academics what has been the most kind of attractive initiative Una Europa has offered you, I think they would probably say our seed funding, which is an initiative that comes from own resources from our partner universities. It's something that we manage centrally in our Brussels office. And it's also, due to the fact of where the financial resources come from, it's a very flexible tool. So it has also been used to build research and innovation collaboration. It's been used to, publish joint books. It's been used to really, experiment with new initiatives that don't necessarily fit external funding scheme per se. So this is something that we've run since the very beginning. So since 2019, at least one call a year. And it is incredibly attractive still. So the applications are rather going up than going down. And we're also, again, there struggling to really accommodate everybody's interests. So, okay, we have now, we've always had established researchers in the lead as PIs, but we also specifically encouraged involvement of early career researchers, This year, for the first time, we will probably test the involvement of students in these research teams, not just in the implementation, but at concept stage, in implementation stage, and afterwards. So we'll see how that goes. But we also have a huge demand, and I think that's relevant for today as well. We have a huge demand from the professional staff as well for a type of seed funding, to use that as well, to get together, to form project teams, to also work out some difficult challenges that they're facing. But I have to say, it's one of the most flexible tools that we have so far.
Ieva, may I ask whether you would remember any initiative which stood out as especially inventive or daring in ways of enabling and encouraging academics to get together around a specific project or a specific structure? Because again, it's so central to the success of these alliances, and we're all trying things, but have you encountered, maybe in some of these other alliances, maybe smaller, maybe more thematic, has anyone found the magic bullet?
We have encountered a lot of initiatives, so it's a little bit difficult to come up with something that's very unique or really stands out, because I feel what really the diversity of the alliances that we mentioned, I feel that is very important, and therefore also with our monitoring framework, alliances were free to be compared to each other, but it's pointless because every alliance is so unique. You are also mentioning some United University support, some focus on short programs, some focus on specific aspects. I think there's also one of mountain universities. So in that sense, it's a bit pointless to compare them one-on-one, and the initiatives are also targeted to that and different. But if I may, I will steer away from research and academic staff a little bit, because what we really felt during the study, and what is special about the alliances, is that student mobility is great, but it's nothing new. It's like the best thing that happened under Erasmus Plus, as many say. Academic staff also has benefited from Erasmus Plus exchanges, etc. But what really was special about the alliances is that they engaged a lot of administrative or professional staff as well. And that's where new aspects came up, because you wouldn't have staff weeks, job shadowing events, or joint administrative transnational offices across the alliance universities before. And there you really saw the motivation and the excitement of people, as in, finally, this is a cooperation project that they're not only managing for the academic staff or for the students, but where they're also fully engaged. So I feel that was something that the alliances brought about that was actually pretty new.
That's such an important point, and many people in this room know how important that is. And that was quite a surprise to many of us, how enthusiastic many of the staff members were about those job shadowing or staff weeks and the likes. And it has delivered not just gratification to those who could take part, but there's been an epidemic effect after their return. All they said about their experience led others to get interested and to want to be involved, and so that has been extremely successful. And of course, staff tends to stay, whereas students, we have new cohorts every year, so that it's another type of tempo. But you, since you are on that topic, I'll go back to our sister alliances and also to the room. You'll have a chance to make comments or ask questions later. But there's one very big issue that's rarely discussed, and which I think is so tricky and so important, and that is how the alliances and these initiatives are perceived by the institutions, but by those who make the institutions, and namely the staff of those institutions. Initially, when we started in 2019, it was quite clear, I think we've all had the same experience, when we all had to ask the administration to do additional things. Obviously, this was a new project, it was big, it was important, it was a priority, so we asked them for numbers about this, process about that, template about this, and we kept asking them things to feed into that preparation of harmonization, of knowing each other better, identifying obstacles. So we were instantly perceived as yet another burden to a community of staff members, which in every university I know is already overburdened and overstretched. So that was not a good start, because we were seen as a difficulty. We were seen as, let's call it what it is, we were seen as another problem, even though we tried to sell the project as aiming to solutions in the future. So from the start, I've been saying, and I've been telling people who wanted to discuss that, to me, the alliances will be a success when we will shift from being a burden to being part of the solution, when teams in different parts of the administration and among academics will see the opportunity and will see the force of solution in alliances rather than the additional burden that's put upon them. This is why CIVIS also invested so heavily in staff, because then we would bring reinforcement where it was needed to also to compensate for the additional work we were asking. May I ask, in both EUTOPIA and Una Europa, whether you have this same sense of the need to be perceived as a force for solution and not just an additional burden on the administration? Again, most people in this room will have their own perception of how initially it was seen as additional work rather than additional opportunities. Start, Mattia.
Well, of course, I'm coming from an independent, let's say, position, being in the central office, and also coming from academia, but not from any of the 10 universities of EUTOPIA. So I'm seeing this from the outside, of course, and also from the informal, let's say, conversation having with colleagues across the alliance at various events and so on and so on. I have to say, of course, we have this this phenomenon of the fact that indeed often the alliance comes as an additional request, maybe an additional template, an additional administrative process that needs to be, let's say, started, especially at the beginning when you start working. Then, of course, maybe the administration workload is reduced over time and it becomes much more repetitive and more of a regular reporting exercise. But, of course, at the beginning, things might be new. Things might come an additional to what colleagues have been already doing. And we always have a mixed perspective. Of course, there are colleagues that might be much more excited because especially what we see is for let's say, for support staff, often not all of them have been involved in, let's say, intensive international collaboration in the past. So there is also a form of excitement and interest of, being engaged in a different type of activities with different contexts during your daily job. But of course, you always have the other parts. And it's always also depending on the universities because of the departments, of various support offices, structures, and so on, how much the alliance really comes as, let's say, a complementary to your job and how much, let's say, you already can dedicate to the alliance instead of dedicating to something else, for example. Still, in a few cases, unfortunately, yet still it's perceived as an additional burden, indeed, because it comes an additional workload that is already, let's say, very close to 100%. And this is a very difficult barrier. What we are trying to think, and we still don't have a solution, and I believe, most of all our alliances in one way or another, when we are thinking about that, is try to create incentives for the people that are coming, that are working on the alliances. Incentives that are typically not in terms of additional salary or in terms of money, but still incentives in terms of recognitions. For example, when we created this EUTOPIA label, this was also an incentive to really have the academics involved of this type of courses really recognized and having this label visible in the curricula so that the course can potentially be more attractive to our students, can be more interested, and let's say gather even more attentions than it was gathering before, for example. So these are examples, and we are thinking also other type of incentives also to provide to staff as well, not only to academics, to really make sure and to really provide, let's say, if we can say a return of investment, if we want to say it also, if we want to say it also like that, in a way that indeed there is more recognition for the people working on Alliance. And I believe this is a common challenge where, I don't know, I'm also looking forward to hear from Sophia if others have any solutions or at least maybe not yet implemented, but ideas that they can be worked in the future.
Yeah, maybe in complement to what Mattia said, and also to come back to the initial question, I think that what we're seeing at the moment is almost a natural result of how the initiative was conceived in the first place. So it was very much a top-down project, if you want to call that, or activity that really was championed by leadership, but that was very quickly matched by lots of bottom-up interest, enthusiasm, motivation in the very beginning. So that got going very quickly. However, what I feel we have still a lot of work to do is on institutional outreach and embeddedness, especially on that layer in between, who are very often the ones driving rewards and recognition, which is what, I think Mattia pointed to really nicely there. So for us, a big focus moving forward will be to work far more with faculties, so with deans, with vice deans, but also with heads of departments when it comes to professional staff, to really get them to understand what and why our academics and professionals really working on the alliance. And I think fundamentally we're talking about needing, when it comes to academics, this is something that needs to be much more recognized in their career progression, and when it comes to professionals, it needs to be much more embedded in their job descriptions. It needs to be really, part of their daily workload and not something that comes on top. Of course, that's quite challenging because I think it's a cultural thing in the first instance, how you reward and recognize your staff engagement. It's also very institutional. It's processes, procedures that you can't just override as an alliance. And it's sometimes also even national frameworks that you have to operate within. And one of the things that we've done is we have a heads of HR group that meets now twice a year, that comes together to really try to understand what is the layer that the alliance has agency over and what can we do together. So that goes beyond really encouraging uptake in institutional processes and frameworks, but also what can the alliance really do to make investment more visible. And one of the things we're looking at is having, for example, badges. That's something that works quite well for students, for example, LinkedIn badges. This is something that they really like, but it's also something we're looking at for professional staff. But again, it's not something that has the same value attached to it across all the participating universities. So it's a work in progress. It's often an exchange, but I do think, to me at least, that's one of the big challenges moving forward. Sheer motivation, enthusiasm is no longer enough. People really need to be seen and heard. And I think one of the most basic things I've realized in the last few months since taking over this job is fundamentally people want to be visible, they want to be seen. And more often than not, that's even just putting people on a stage and thanking them and highlighting what they've done. Often that's a really important first step, and it's something that also all the groups share. That's something students want, professionals want to be seen, but academics too. It sounds simple, but I think it's quite important, and we don't do enough.
That's a really good point. I think another point is how we communicate about what we're trying to do. And I think this is typically something which will be different from each of the alliances, not just given its nature, but given its individual members. The question is always, where are we going with this alliance? In some cases, it might be tempting to see the alliance as something overarching, something which is above the rest of the university, sort of distant but overlooking, but that has risks. And I know, some universities, we won't name specific universities. Some universities, for example, have a culture of fierce autonomy of their faculties and departments. And so these faculties feel threatened by just the authorities of their own university. So they might see CIVIS or an alliance as an additional threat to their autonomy. So we have to take that into account. Whereas in other places, it might be seen as reassuring to be part of a larger ensemble, which gives you credibility and gives you leverage. So taking all that into account makes it very difficult. And also the very aims of the alliance. I think our three alliances have similar aims of, we like to say that the spirit of CIVIS is that of the European Union. We cherish our diversity, it's our wealth. We don't want to reduce the diversity, on the contrary. But that's not the case of all the alliances. There's this, I've got the name, I think EUT. There's one alliance, their tagline is, today we are 8, tomorrow we'll be 1. So their aim is clearly to merge into one large transnational educational structure where each of the currently member establishment will be just the local partner of that alliance. So that's a completely different approach. And of course, you can't transpose one to the other. But this leads us, and I'm going back to Yann-Mael, to a more European political perspective on this. And we will talk about the European degree label, just as an example of how the European Union is clearly trying to see how far we can go into providing a transnational European level framework without interfering with, of course, the autonomy of the member states at the level of higher education, because it's still their basic competence. So can you tell us a little more about how we went from, I mean, we had discussions in the past, some people in the room here were involved, about a European degree, and how we sort of folded back, at least temporarily, to the European degree label. Can you tell us a little more how you negotiate this how not to go too far, but how to push the walls a little bit of how much we can do, because that relates to how the alliances are enabling academics and others to do things which they could not do before?
Another easy question. In a way, you will find the first references of the idea of a European degree. At the same time, there was the first references of European universities. They were mentioned in the same speech at the same time. First, we really focused on building what these European universities would be, and there was not a very clear path for them. There was not a unique model for them, and that's something that we are quite happy about nowadays. Now, you're mentioning that some alliances indeed see themselves as basically future pan-European universities with local branches. Others see themselves as the strong network of individual institutions that preserve their entire autonomy and so on, and that's completely fine. This is the diversity of the model we have. Now, on the European degree, it was a bit the same thinking. So the basic idea was European degree, and I remember the sentence, enabling students to combine studies in different institutions and get a degree at the end for it. So that was how it was defined politically. Now, how do you make it happen concretely in practice, knowing that, one, the European Union has no competence over education. We cannot regulate anything. We can make recommendations. We can say, hey, that's a good idea. We can provide funding to do certain things, but always within the limit of national competencies, sometimes regional competencies. So we cannot create a model of a European degree as a diploma, unique model, pan-European. But when we looked at the alliances developing, and also from what we know with Erasmus Mundus for now 20 years, is that we realized we kind of have these European degrees already. They are called the joint degrees. It's one program, students are in international cohorts, they move around, and at the end they get a degree from all these institutions. And why not then making these European degrees? And it's not just to say, okay, there was the mandate to do a European degree and we ticked the box and we did it. No, it also needs to have a purpose for it. So, as I said, we don't have competence for that. So we cannot say, this is how a program should be done, this is how you should award the degrees. But when you want to work together, these kind of rules, you have to sort them out. And usually that huge work that is completely invisible to policymakers is made by the academic and the administrative staff of the universities, who have to build the program, make it work on practice, how you're going to organize the selection of the students, how the curriculum will be working, how you're going to deliver the degrees, and every country has different rules. And there are some help. There is the Boolean tools, we call them, so the ECTS, standards for quality assurance, and so on, but not really a clear roadmap on how to make a joint program or how to issue joint degrees. They never agreed on that. When I say they, it means all the different countries. They never agreed on that. And from each of their standpoint, they think their way of doing it is the best. So the best way to do it is that everyone aligns with you, and there's no problem. But it's not how it works in practice. And all the negotiations was about explaining to the national authorities, well, we kind of need to have a common level of understanding of the flexibility we need to give institutions to enable them to work together. And there the alliances were a very powerful example, because we finance alliances to do many things. And they do an extraordinary amount of different things, and part of it are joint programs. And very often in the application, they were very enthusiastic, and they were saying, we are going to build that many joint programs, so on. Then the reality hit. And that's a very powerful example, because we use that to say, to explain to all the different national authorities, look, it doesn't make sense. We're financing universities to do things that you are not enabling them to do in practice. Why? And very often there's no good reason. It's just a lack of time, lack of knowledge, that there are particular obstacles and so on. So we used a lot the experience of the alliances to map all the different difficulties that you are facing in your daily work, and then bring it to the table to them to say, look, this is problematic, why don't you give flexibility there? Why don't you change your local law here? Of course you do what you want, but it would really help your institutions. And that's a very powerful message, because I must say ministries are not interested in pleasing the European Commission, but they are interested in making sure that their institutions are competitive and can deliver. And that's a much more powerful message. Now, how do we end up with a label? Negotiations are a difficult process. And it is a bit scary to have even something named European degree for many authorities. They fear losing control, possible competencies. It's a bit the same you are saying with different faculties being very autonomous. They don't want to lose control. So what we want to do through the label is to show them, look, it's exactly the same end result. It's built exactly the same way as if it was a pan-European type of degrees. It has certain criteria, so the basic things it needs to do. Give flexibility to institutions to achieve this. The end result will be exactly the same. And that's what matters in the end. The students will have the same experience, the academic staff will have the same opportunities, and the administrative staff will be facing less problems when creating these problems. Now, of course, while doing it, they may realize that the easiest would have actually been to establish this pan-European type of degrees, because in one go you solve all the problems instead of trying to solve the issues bit by bit to make sure your institutions can get the label. But it's a process. Now we have the first labels that will be awarded as from after summer. So it's ready, basically. If you have joint programs in your institutions, you will be able to apply to receive this label, and you'll have this European level recognition. Maybe some national authorities will decide to attach to it some extra flexibility regarding law or regulations, maybe some derogatory measures. And then we'll see how it works. There will probably still be some things that will be problematic for institutions to get there, to get the label, and we'll use that information always to feed national authorities to say, well, now you wanted to have a European degree label, why don't you make it possible for institutions to get there? It's exactly the same process, but it's iterative. And in 2 years' time, we're supposed to come with an evaluation of how the label worked. So you can expect that the evaluation will say, it is possible, you just have to do your homework and make it possible, I suspect. And basically, you can solve the issues by trying to solve all the small issues one by one. Or, why don't you all agree to create a European category of degrees specifically made for when your universities want to work one with another? I can suspect this is going to be what the proposal will be in 2 years' time. I must say it's not easy because there is a lot of, it's not necessarily always a rational discussion. It is a lot about fear of losing competencies, fear of losing control, fear that you start something that you cannot longer control over time. So it's not going to be easy, but at least breaking the barrier to have this label was, I must say, a huge step. And it was, I can ensure you, a huge battle in the negotiations between many countries supporting it, many countries opposing it, and really trying to stay focused on what the end goal is, meaning offer opportunity to students and to your institution to pool resources, capacities, knowledge and expertise to be competitive in the future. We managed so far and will continue pushing. Same with the alliances. I think we always refuse to talk about the alliances as projects. Maybe the executive agency does, but we as the European Commission, we always refuse to word the word project, because a project has an end date. You have deliverables, you have outputs, and that's it. Then maybe you have another project on something completely different. The alliances don't have an end date. We see them as a transformation of how you cooperate one with another. Some will go extra far to the point of wanting to merge one with another. Some will decide to use this as a strong network to cooperate, but we don't want this to end. And we want this to continue, evolve over time to something always bigger and something that fits what you want to do with it, mostly.
Thank you. The European degree label raises enormous interest within alliances and, of course, investment in terms of resources, which is a bit reminiscent of the BIPs, the blended intensive programs. CIVIS has gone all out on BIPs to the point where I think in most of our member universities, people think CIVIS invented the BIPs or something like that. So, but I'd like to ask Ieva, since you're looking very closely at the European degree label, whether, again, you suggested we should get out of our silo. Is this just alliances getting excited about the label, or is there a broader interest in higher education for this initiative? And everyone knows this is just a step on the way to something bigger.
Well, the label is separate from the alliances. The label is for any consortium of higher education institutions, and while we see good examples that would qualify for the label immediately at the level of among the European Universities Alliances, the label is broader than that. So, and I suppose there will be interest because there are also probably from new, but also from existing giant programs, because for example, we have the Erasmus Mundus joint master's programs that are also separate from the alliances, and the label is conceptualized in a way that any joint program in any format, as long as it's offered by two institutions from two EU member states, could apply for the label as long as it meets the criteria.
Thank you. Looking at the future now, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and when we started the alliances, and I think this was in the terms of the first call, there was a lot of focus on societal challenges. These alliances were to develop activities which would help the community facing big societal challenges. And at the same time, the objectives were, at least implicitly, about overcoming a specific set of those challenges, which are the challenges that face higher education itself. We are all mostly funded by public funds. Those funds are at risk of being reduced. We have in many countries a fast increase in number of students. I mean, all these are challenges by themselves. I want to ask Una Europa and EUTOPIA whether the Alliance was specifically working on, let's face those challenges together. Let's be inventive about the specific challenges, not so much of climate change and the kind of big challenges of society, but specific challenges of universities today and in the near future.
It's another big question, of course, but I'm thinking so of course we are working on thematic challenges on courses in research as well, and we, through different iterative process, we also try to identify at the end 5 areas. So we didn't put, again, our alliance started really bottom up in several things. So that's why first we started the activities, and then based on the excellence of research that we have and based on the emerged activities, we identify those focus areas, lighthouses we called, across which we are trying to develop our programs in education, research, and innovation. But those, of course, refer to the big challenges: climate change, democracy, artificial intelligence, and so on that we are all facing. Then at the same time, yes, we have challenges that more or less, because indeed the national contexts are very different. In our case, we also have, as also in the case of CIVIS and Una Europa, one institutions from the United Kingdom, where we faced even different challenges, now partially also overcome with the accession of the UK to Erasmus+. And in this case, we are mainly, we are trying to, let's say, work on these challenges more into our working groups. So we have dedicated meetings of some of the working groups, going from, let's say, the board of presidents to specific working groups on inclusions, on human resources, for example, where we try to see more of an initial brainstorming or exchange of good practices where we are, let's say, where our institutions are in terms of development of policies in favor, or even, let's say, to fight when it comes, for example, to budget cuts and so on and so on. So how our institutions are transforming, evolving, or in a way changing internally policy and strategies to face some of the challenges that we are facing externally. And then, of course, we feel that typically this is already, I mean, I can say for my level, of course, mostly the level of president or vice president, but also talking with the colleagues involved more in the working groups, we see that this exchange of practices typically is very useful for people indeed that they are not very well aware of the other context to try to understand, because several challenges, especially when it comes to national challenges, that may be coming in waves with different length, with different type of governments, that similar type of governments are coming at different time in our different countries and putting sometimes similar policies and the limitations of international students on the higher fees for international students, things like that. And then in a very few limited cases, what we try to do when we see that there is indeed a common understanding, a common, let's say, also timing in terms of the same challenge faced more or less at the same time across the majority of universities, we decide to typically develop these in a kind of what we typically call a joint, let's say, policy, for example. So we try to do something in the HR, for example, in the duration of these projects, and in the next one we are trying also to bring this to different areas. But I have to say, it's always a kind of initial bottom-up reflections, and then we see typically becomes useful indeed from the point of view of sharing experiences, and then we can see in a very few cases it also can raise and become something really as a joint policy or a joint actions that we are trying to do together.
Trying to complement what Mattia said, because I think we're approaching it in a very similar way. For me, when we talk about these challenges, it's also where the element of cross-alliance collaboration comes in quite a bit. I think we all have similar structures of working groups, including similar topics that are represented here today, looking into mobility, looking into QA, into research and innovation, and how you can build that as an alliance. But then, once we have identified those, it's also about how you bring them to the attention of the right people who can actually then also progress the frameworks that need progressing. So 2 things maybe to highlight. I think what's working really well already is groups at national level, primarily universities that are engaging in alliances that come together and that then really have a powerful voice towards their national policymakers. And I think that's also really linking back to what Yann-Mael said, that the national governments are more often willing to listen to their own universities, especially when they come in groups and especially when they represent every single university in a country, which is perhaps easier if we talk about Belgium. That works quite well, I think. And we have seen already exceptions in national law as a result for alliances coming out of that. But also maybe to mention, Ieva mentioned it briefly already, For You For All, I think is a helpful platform where we try to plug in more and more our experts from the partners. I think in the pilot phase, For You For All, as a structure, was a lot about collaboration of central offices, of project coordinators, and that's really helpful and useful. But I would also like to extend that benefit to the colleagues on the ground. So we now have these topical groups on mobility, on student administration, on internationalization. And I think this is really where the colleagues can find counterparts and not just exchange on the common issues, but also the variety of solutions that can be found. You said this as well, François, there's not just one solution to many things, but there's a range. So I think these fora, we shouldn't underestimate in how valuable they can be to us as alliances, but also to the colleagues behind the scenes.
we cannot emphasize enough how these community of practice are extremely helpful and productive. And the spirit of collaboration among alliances is remarkable and has been from the start when we started earlier. I told you there would be an opportunity for questions or comments from the room. If anyone wants to, yes, do we have a specific mic for that, or should I just walk up to you? No, because we are streamed online, so you need to speak in the microphone.
Hi everybody, I'm Tiziana from Sapienza University, and a question and a challenge about students. So I don't know if it's the case of your alliances, but most students perceive the alliance as a project, not as a new education format. So what we can do to shift this narrative from so that student can perceive like citizens of the alliance instead of visitors of the partner universities. So what we do at this level? Thank you.
Well, if I can say, well, I think partially, I mean, of course, because the alliance is also unfortunately started as a project, and of course now we are developing the alliance as a long-term collaboration. So this perception is there. I think of course, for students that are participating, the benefits can be much more clear. And I think as alliances and also as institutions, we really need to be able to use them as best as possible as ambassadors of the alliance within their own institutions. I know several of our alliances, we are trying to do so. But then I think it's also really about the little things in the daily life. For example, even with our HR colleagues as well, we were trying to think, we are trying the best way to really have the alliances as part of the, let's say, the welcome fair that you have at each institutions, or even on the badges of, let's say, your student card. Normally you only have the logo of your university, maybe the logo of your national ministry and so on, but typically there is not the logo of the alliance. So you don't really perceive that your university is belonging to something. So these, I think, are all the little details, and there are many more. I mean, these are just two examples that we really need to try more and more to bring there since the beginning. So really when you join an institution, you really feel that the alliance is something bigger. Maybe it's for you, maybe it's not for you. This is up to you to decide, but you really have to have this idea in mind from the beginning, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with Mattia. I think it's primarily a question of institutional embeddedness, and to what extent is the partner university able to really integrate the alliance as part of their identity and then make it something that is natural in a student's journey. But for me, and that might be something that we share across our three alliances, it's also a question of scale of what we have on offer for our students. We have 550,000 students in Una Europa, and we have to be quite real about the fact that for now we're reaching a very small proportion that can really concretely, actively benefit from what we do. Of course, more and more we have now ambassadors, which I think is one of the most powerful things. One student talking to another, really sharing how it's changed their journey. But for me, it's really a continued challenge of how can we potentially ever reach even 10% of these students is a very big question mark that our alliances of our scale are really going to have to grapple with going forward.
I'm going to take advantage of having the mic because I have a question, and it's for Yann-Mael and also for the colleagues. We are in this dilemma of being seen and conceived as a long-term project, but being financed as a project. And every time we restart, like right now, we are going through a phase of a 2-year project that's coming, which is quite amazing. How do we grapple with this big dilemma? Because we need to plan for a future that is never sure, or that is just design in milestones and deliverables, but aiming for transformation. So it's a complicated question, but maybe some light on that. And I don't know, François, if you want to take a couple of questions or just go one by one. Okay. One here and one here. Okay.
We have one question online from Louise de Bermentier, which is part of the Invest Alliance and the University of Rennes, Champagne-Ardenne. She said that you're speaking about research and innovation, and so in this area, how do you see the future of the Alliance?
And then I take a final one here.
To Yann-Mael, good morning. Thank you for illuminating us more on the EDL. Could you please help me to get more arguments on what is the added value of the EDL? I promise you, I still fight with that question. Thank you.
Yann-Mael, you can start. Another easy question for you. Two, actually.
Well, one is very easy. One is a bit more complex. I'll start with a complex one, which is the funding. We know it's not ideal. We know indeed that the way the funding has been structured with its 4 years funding and now complemented by this short-term funding until we reach the end of the current Erasmus program, until we get a new pot of money we can actually spend, which we don't know how much is going to be in there yet. The Commission made a proposal, now it's for the Council and the Parliament to decide how much money they will be to spend on education in the next Erasmus program. Before we know that, we cannot say we are going to give that, or we cannot even say how much. So that's one constraint we have, that at EU level we operate with 7 years budget, which is already quite long. It's better than 1 year budget, but 7 years, and now we'll reach the end of this phase where indeed we need to have clarity on the next step. The most optimistic people say there should be an agreement sometime in December this year, and from then we can probably start planning ahead. And the next steps will be then, okay, this EU money, how can it be spent to support the alliances? Now, we all want to provide also longer term funding to the alliances because we know it's important also for staff motivation, for the status of the contract they get, for also to have longer planning on the activities. We all agree on that, and we are looking into ways on how that can work, knowing that at the same time we should have a mechanism of, spending the money or allocating the money while having a bit of a check of the quality of what is being done with that money. It's not like you can sign a blank check for 7 years and then we'll see after 7 years what has happened. Nobody will let us do that, right? We also are operating under control, and so we need to find a mechanism that allows some sort of monitoring that is adequate and gives a margin to say, I'm sorry, but if there is a big problem at this stage, we stop the funding because we cannot keep funding for 7 years something that is not delivering already. And this is very difficult exercise that we would have to decide if that's better than 4+3 or another model. That is something, of course, that the discussion will take place with you. But then something we have to highlight as well is that European funding should be at least only a part of the funding that a long-term alliance uses. And we know this is something that is not necessarily nice to hear from others that we are asking to pay for. But you said already, some of you are using your own resources as institutions to make this alliance live and deliver even more than what the EU funding allows you to do. And that's truly a sign of how rooted the alliance is in the strategy of the institutions. And if money only comes from the EU, we know very well that when the project will end, then the alliance will end. And that's not what we are trying to achieve. If we want to have truly long-term transformation, the institution should make it a normal part of their activities, meaning dedicate a part of their own resources to it, and national level as well. The point of EU funding should not replace national funding. It's a complement, but it's not a replacement. So if, and I believe nearly all national authorities are now agreeing that they want to keep alliances in the future, they also have to inject funding to their own institutions to participate to alliances, to the alliances themselves. And this way you have 3 strands of funding. I understand a bit difficult administratively to manage because probably with different timelines and requirements indeed, but there's no long-term sustainability of an alliance if it only relies on EU funding. So that's on the first point. The added value of the Joint European Degree label. So first of all, you can only talk about the added value of something that exists, and we have to wait for it to exist to give you something based on facts and evidence. That I cannot give you ahead of it existing. So as from summer, we can probably see what it will deliver in practice. What I can tell you already is that it doesn't exist yet, but it generated a lot of added value in general, because national authorities, for once, are ready to work on joint programs, joint degrees. They show openness on changing legislation, changing administrative rules, clarifying things that were not clear, and make your life easier on creating joint programs and awarding joint degrees. That's, from the policy side, a huge added value that without launching the idea of the Joint European Degree label would have not even happened. So it has already triggered change. It will trigger more changes over the course of the next years. That's from the policy side. Now, if you look at those building the programs, if the national authorities are indeed serious about it, it should become easier to create joint programs and joint degrees, less time consuming, less resource intensive, and so on. So that's budgetary side of things. Now, if you look from the outside, you look at students, you look at employers, you look at society in general. Joint programs today, they exist. They have existed for many years. We have been funding joint programs for 20 years as Erasmus Mundus. They are programs that are super attractive for students coming from outside of Europe, because you don't get to study at one university in one country, you get to study at multiple universities in multiple countries. That's extremely attractive. It's also very attractive for local students, but the thing is, they represent probably 2–3% of the total offer of programs in Europe. One reason is that because they are very hard to make. Second reason is because institutions are not necessarily motivated to create such programs because they look like niche things on the side, and unless there is a big pot of EU funding coming with it, they are not so interested. And from the other side, from students' perspective and perspective, you just have no idea what a joint program is. Yeah, can you explain to a student what a joint program is, a student in first year at university? Can you explain to students who graduate from those programs, they then go on the job market and they always have to explain that they did this weird program. Nobody understands what these are. So the label will probably help to bring clarity, because at least, okay, many people call them European degree, joint European degree, whatever. It's a European thing that is easy to explain. I studied at multiple universities. I graduated from these universities. I was mobile. It's more than Erasmus. It's more than just an Erasmus mobility. It's truly, I did an international program, and I was rewarded with an international degree for it. Doesn't change the legal structure, but the rationale, the narrative completely changes. And then it becomes much clearer. You look at the interest for joint programs before we started to talk about the label, and now that I receive questions about students asking me where they can find a European degree program. They have no clue what it is. It just sounds nice. They just want to be part of it. I receive questions from employers asking in what fields this program exists. I receive questions from small universities who never did the joint program, who are asking me, how can I get the label? It has triggered interest for this model of cooperation that is not the only one we should promote. We should promote flexible lifelong learning opportunities. We should promote micro-credentials, blended intensive programs, so on. It's just one part. But this part is very important, because this is where this is a format of programs where you can build super highly specialized competencies for students, in which you can build program in, indeed, sometimes very niche fields that your institution on its own is not capable of offering, because you don't have the labs, or you don't have the teachers, or you don't have the right equipment, but together with your partners you can. So together you can create an offer you didn't have before, and reach out this specialization field that was completely out of your league before. And then we have to think a bit ahead, more in the future. We're talking increasing number of students. Yes, for some institutions. There will be a decreasing number of students for many institutions, especially those not located in big capitals or regional capital cities. We have a demographic crisis coming in Europe. It's not avoidable. It will come. In 10 years, in 20 years, there will be less students than there is today, simply because people don't make babies. And that will have a huge impact on institutions and on the offer you're capable of providing. If you have less students, you have less programs. If you have less programs, you have less specializations. If you have less programs, maybe you have less teachers. So you have to think ahead. This is very long-term planning on how you can build on this type of cooperation to not lose the race and just let only capital cities capable of having completely comprehensive institutions offering a wide range of studies. So I was a bit long on that, but there is so much to say on the added value, and it just depends on who you're talking to, I guess.
Thank you. It's time to wrap up. I just want to say a word about the question from the colleague from Université de Reims. Of course, we don't have the right panel to completely address the question of research. It's something that we talk a lot about, how do we rebalance our alliances, which are completely biased towards education, because that's where most of the funding comes from. We've had, a few efforts from DG Research and the swaps initially and things like that to bring in some energy on the research side of things. But that's a shared challenge among alliances. How do you bring in research, even though there is no similar type of funding scheme as we get from Erasmus+. And that's where, among other things, our legal entities come into play, because that's also a shared characteristic of our three alliances, that we have a legal entity. But that would be I think we should have a whole session about how do we bring in research, because it is so unnatural for universities to have to split ambitious undertakings in education without talking about research. That's, the entanglement of the two defines us. So it's that's a really good topic, but probably not when we have no time to discuss it now. So thanks for the question, and it's a really important topic. Before I release you to the coffee break at the end of the room, there are two things. One is housekeeping. I forgot to mention, in this hyper innovative building, there's something that might surprise you. It's part of the experiment. It's part of being on par with the expectations of today. All the bathrooms, except the ones at the back here, but in everywhere else in the building, are gender neutral. So don't panic. There's one door for everyone. It's going to be all right. Of course, it's arranged in a way which is suitable for gender neutral bathrooms. But again, except the ones at the back of this room, where there's still one door for men and one door for women. But so that you know, because you will have activities elsewhere in the building. So I want to end with thanking very warmly our 4 panelists, because I think they delivered beautifully on the intent of this panel, which is to help us embrace the bigger picture. And I certainly have learned a lot of things, so I hope you have too. So thank you to all 4 of them.